Good afternoon, Prime Minister. You say that the recognition of a Palestinian state is predicated on important democratic reforms. Is it conditional on quick action towards those reforms? Is there any scenario in which you arrive at the General Assembly and don't recognize Palestine?
Can I thanks for the question, Mr. Wells. Let me say on the second part, it's an intention. So, of course, there's a scenario, possibly one that I can't imagine. So I wouldn't want to, if there were no scenario, we would proceed immediately. That's the first point. But to go more broadly, and I think this is an important area you're concentrating on, it's predicated, it relies upon the representations that have been made by the Palestinian Authority, representations that have been made now several times, both publicly spoken, in writing to me as Prime Minister, and representations that I tested, if you will, President Abbas in a lengthy and robust call today to confirm the intentions and the ability to do so. Now, part of what Minister Anand and her colleagues are doing is to provide some resources to help with some governance aspects of those. But of course, the most important elements of those representations with respect to the democratic process. Who cannot be part of that process? Hamas. Who can play no role in the future state? Hamas. The demilitarization and the persistent demilitarized Palestinian state. And of course, the reinforcement of the importance of living side by side in peace and security with Israel. So it's a relatively short period. Last observation, if I may. It's a relatively short period of time between now and the UN General Assembly. But we'll be working with the Palestinian Authority, and very importantly, not just us, but a series of our allies and regional powers, including those that the minister was with in New York earlier this week, and can't name them all, but of course, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, and others, who also, to broaden your question a bit, have been very clear now that Hamas can play no role, that Hamas must return all the hostages and their remains, and the Palestinian state must be demilitarized.
Follow-up. Yesterday, you had announced no intention to recognize Palestine. Today, you have announced that intention. It's impossible for me not to read into that a critique of Israel's recent behavior in the region.
Well, it's there are elements, and I listed them in my remarks, and they played a central factor in our decision. I think one of the core points is that Canada's had a long-standing principled stand, as you know. I won't repeat it. You're familiar with it. A belief in a two-state solution, the inalienable rights of both peoples, and the fact that peace and security could only be achieved through it. That prospect, that possibility of a two-state solution is being eroded before our eyes. The accelerated settlements, the potential partition of the West Bank, the actions in Gaza that shift large portions of the population, 80% of the population displaced. Other actions which are changing the facts on the ground in a way that removes the possibility or lessens the possibility of there being a Palestinian state. And then when that is reinforced by votes to that effect, by statements and policies to that effect of the government, yes, that has been one of the factors that has brought us to this point to try to reverse with partners. We're not under illusions about the strength of Canada, but to reverse with partners this cycle so that a two-state solution becomes viable. Lots more has to happen for it to be there. Thank you.
We'll go to Stephanie Levitz, Globe and Mail.
Hello, Prime Minister. Just to pick up on what you said there then, how do you see this recognition as a way to achieve that peace? Why is this a useful thing to do?
It's useful in several respects in our judgment. The first is that it works with a series of partners in the region, traditional allies, but other countries that we have worked less with. Those more broadly represented in the two-state solution process that was more formally launched earlier this week. Secondly, it reaffirms and it broadens, we're part of a process that broadens the recognition of certain aspects that we have always viewed as fundamental for a Palestinian state, but others have not acknowledged. No role for Hamas, demilitarized. And to the horrible specifics of the current situation, the return of all the hostages and their remains. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt is 3 examples of countries that now, literally in the last few days, have made those determinations public. And the third aspect, and I'll hand back, is that we are part of a process. We came to this decision independently, but we are part of processes that are working towards peace, that have strength in breadth and in number. So the 2-state solution process, you would have heard reference to the E3 process, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, and peace plan that they are working on, that they briefed the U.S. president on. And in both those respects, Canada can help to support those efforts.
It's not been clear, say, in the last 48 hours that either the Netanyahu government or Hamas is at all interested in these conditions. And so who's going to make them?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, Hamas, I don't know, Hamas is not welcome in any way, shape, or form. So, of course, and one of the issues is not to give Hamas in any way, shape, or form a veto over a process that affects both the Israeli and Palestinian people. I could say much harsher things, and I should say much harsher things about Hamas, but that's a basic structural point. There are some in positions of influence in the state of Israel that do not want a 2-state solution, that are taking actions to frustrate that actively. And we are part of a growing and very significant international community that is leaning against that, that is prioritizing the possibility and the prospect for a 2-state solution. There are other measures that can be taken. For now, what we're doing is to promote a positive process towards peace.
Olivier Ferrand-Boissé, TVA.
Olivier Ferrand-Boissé,
Oui, bonjour.
TVA. TVA. Hello to both of you. Could you please explain something? Today, you're saying that you may recognize Palestinian statehood. What would that change in the current humanitarian situation, which in fact seems to be the main reason for your declaration, your statement today? Answer. Thank you for that very important question. What can Canada do to support the ongoing humanitarian crisis? It's not a matter of diplomacy, it's a matter of humanitarian assistance. We must work with our partners in the region. Our partners include Jordan, for example. Canada must now, at this very moment, in fact, at this very moment, we are working with Jordan in order to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza tomorrow. There are only 4 or 5 countries which are in a position to do so. This is all part of the process. The humanitarian situation is, of course, related to broader diplomacy, but we must focus on the current situation in Gaza, which is a matter of humanitarian aid. That's what's required. The state of Israel is currently opening the doors to more humanitarian aid. Follow-up question. I'd like to ask you about trade talks with the United States. The clock is ticking. The United States signed a deal with the European Union. Would you, at this point, accept a deal under which we would have a lower base tariff, a lower tariff baseline, as with the case of the European Union? Answer, that's a very specific question about the ongoing negotiations. Our talks thus far have been constructive, and they are ongoing. They cover a broad variety of topics. Now, it is possible that we may not conclude talks by August 1st, but there are many avenues for teamwork and cooperation between Canada and the United States. Of course, this includes investments. This also includes Canadian investments in defense and security. Talks are ongoing. Thank you.
The question is, well, I'll simplify. It's always good to say that, look, these are complex, they're comprehensive, they're constructive negotiations with the Americans are ongoing. It's possible that they may not conclude by the 1st of August. But we'll see. With the teams there, we're working hard. Conversations today, myself. So we'll see. There are, and the specific aspect of the question included a reference to the European Union deal, and could it include, could our accord with the United States include commitments on investments and other aspects? And I just observed that there are many areas for cooperation between Canada and the United States, including defense spending, security spending, investments, which is one of the reasons why we're having these broader discussions.
Next up, so Paul Dutch, Global News.
Speaking of the United States, did you consult with the U.S. about your decision to recognize Palestine? And can the sustainable peace process work without the U.S. being on side?
Look, the United States is the essential partner in peace in the Middle East, and in virtually in many parts of the world. And we've seen that demonstrated. First point. Second point is that the president does take a direct interest in resolving conflicts, and as has with respect to a broader set of developments in the Middle East. And so again, the United States, this president will play and continue to play a central role. Others have responsibilities, Canada included, responsibilities on the humanitarian side, responsibilities with governance and other aspects that we're supporting. And we make our own independent foreign policy positions. And when we see opportunities, when we see necessity, which is what we see in this case, given the retreat of the prospect of a two-state solution because of the facts on the ground, as I explained, when we see that possibility and we see the combination of an ability to influence because of our own voice and actions, but because of others and other processes that are being put in place. But to be absolutely clear, and I'll finish on this point, which is, I referenced earlier an E3 plan, that early stages peace plan. I talked to Prime Minister Starmer about it, President Macron as well today. Prime Minister Starmer, this public domain, briefed the President of the United States about the plan a few days ago. So there are connections all the way through, and my colleagues obviously in regular contact with her, homologue. Sorry. Yep.
You said you came to this decision independently, so you're saying you would have come to this without France or the UK making this decision?
No, look, I mean, I meant independent of the United States. But yes, it does matter that others are moving. It does matter because it increases the prospect of success. But the core of the decision is taken on the principle that of self-determination and the rights of people to self-determination. We have long, Canada, speaking for Canada now, have long felt that this should come later in a process, and that our recognitions, other recognitions, the state of Palestine, should come at a point of maximum impact during a peace process. we're now at a position, I'm sorry to repeat myself, where in our judgment and the judgment of others, is that the prospect of a Palestinian state is literally receding before our eyes, or being eroded before our eyes. And so the act of the intention to recognize, which is what we're saying today, and working with others to support a Palestinian state, possibility of a Palestinian state, reestablishes that opportunity.
David Turton, CBC.
U.S. trade talks. Is there any evidence that a deal with the U.S. is possible without tariffs on aluminum and steel?
On aluminum and steel. Look, I think I'd answer it this way, which is that the president has been very clear, and all the actions bear this out, and that there are certain sectors that are strategic in their judgment to the United States economy: aluminum, steel, automobiles, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, lumber falls under 232 as well, the so-called 232 authority, and potentially one or two more. The U.S. approach, the revealed approach of the United States in all those sectors, has been to have tariffs, some base level of tariffs, and that's consistent. That's consistent across with very few relatively minor exceptions. So if we're speaking in general terms, those are the priors. That's the case. Obviously, in any broader deal, there are gives and takes, and there's various factors. But I think we have to recognize that in the strategic sectors, again, as defined by the United States, what's strategic to them, that they have tariffs.
Okay. And just coming back to the recognition of a Palestinian state and the conditions that, well, the assurances, excuse me, that you've been given by the Palestinian Authority, elections, reforms, non-militarization. Just coming back to that issue of elections, how do you expect them to hold elections in Gaza when you see the devastation?
Yeah.
And when you see the occupation by the Israelis in the West Bank? How can they hold elections?
Look, there are. I mean, clearly that's not a possibility now. It's not a possibility in the near term. And part of this again is, let's go back to where we're starting, which is we are working ourselves with others to preserve the possibility of a two-state solution, to not allow the facts on the ground, deaths on the ground, the settlements on the ground, the expropriations on the ground, to get to such an extent that that this is not possible. Much has to happen in order for a democratic, viable state is established in Palestine. We fully recognize that, and we're committed to help work as part of that process. But I'm not in any way, shape minimizing the scale of that task. But we are going back to the fundamental principle of self-determination and what we can do to preserve that internationally.